The sun had not yet burned away the mist that clung to the savannah. In the gray half-light of dawn, the plain was silent except for the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the distant cough of a hyena. Beneath a gnarled acacia that had long since died and lost its leaves, a lion stood motionless. His mane was dark and coarse with dust, his flanks scarred from old battles. The wind that usually carried the smell of antelope and dust across the grasslands was still. It was as if the world itself held its breath. The lion's name among the rangers who sometimes saw him from their jeeps was Koro. He was the last dominant male of the Eastern Pride, a group that had once ruled a stretch of savanna larger than some European cities. Now only 2 lionesses and 3 nearly grown cubs remained. Poachers, drought, and the slow disappearance of prey had thinned their numbers. Koro had seen 7 seasons of dry grass and 7 seasons of rain, old for a wild lion, and his ribs pressed sharply against his hide. He lifted his nose and tasted the air. Nothing. No scent of wildebeest herds, no sign of buffalo. The migration had passed weeks ago, leaving behind only the hard earth and the faint trail of vultures that circled in the far distance. Hunger made his movements heavy, but still he watched the horizon, every muscle alert. Lions are patient hunters. They can wait for hours for a chance, but patience means little when the land itself offers nothing to eat. Behind him, one of the lionesses, younger with a torn ear, stirred in the tall grass. She yawned, revealing teeth stained yellow from bone-cracking meals. The cubs, lanky and restless, followed her movements with quiet eyes. They were too thin. Koro could feel their weakness as if it were his own. His instinct told him to move west, toward the river that might still hold water. But the river lay beyond the territory of another pride, a risk that could mean death. A dry gust lifted the dust around the dead tree, whispering through its hollow branches. Koro blinked slowly, feeling the air shift. It was not the scent of prey that reached him, but something different, the faint musk of another lion. He turned his head, ears pricking forward. Somewhere, far off, a rival male was calling. The sound rolled across the savannah like distant thunder. It was not a challenge yet, only a warning. This land is watched. For a long moment, Koro remained still. His tail flicked once, twice. He knew what that roar meant. If he left, his family might die of hunger. If he stayed, he might have to fight. And in his condition, a fight could end his reign forever. As the sun rose higher, burning away the mist, Koro made his decision. He padded toward the west, slow but determined, his massive paws leaving deep prints in the cracked soil. The lioness and her cubs followed at a distance. The dead tree stood alone behind them, its shadow shrinking as the day grew hotter, a silent witness to the old lion's march into uncertain ground. By noon, the heat shimmered off the plains like glass. Vultures began to circle overhead again, patient, expectant. Somewhere, far beyond the reach of sight, the wind shifted once more, and for the first time that morning it remembered which way to blow. By the second day, the ground beneath Koro's paws had turned from yellow grass to cracked clay. The sun burned without mercy, and each breath felt like fire in his lungs. The pride followed in silence, their pace slow and uneven. The lioness with the torn ear walked a few meters behind him, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. The cubs lagged farther back, panting, their small paws leaving shallow prints in the dust. They were moving toward the Itsala River, though calling it a river now was a kindness. For most of the year, it was nothing more than a scar through the land, a winding trench lined with dry reeds and scattered bones. In the rainy season, it came alive, carrying muddy torrents that drew herds from miles around. But now, in the heart of the dry months, it was silent and dead, like the rest of the plain. As the sun reached its highest point, Koro stopped. He stood on a ridge overlooking what used to be the riverbank. The ground below was cracked and pale, glinting faintly in the heat. A few vultures circled lazily above it, hoping for movement that never came. Koro's nostrils flared. Beneath the stench of rot and dust, he caught a faint trace of moisture, Perhaps a shallow pool trapped in a bend of the riverbed? He descended slowly, careful with each step. The lioness and cubs followed, their tails low. When they reached the bottom, the air was heavy and still, muffling even the faint buzz of insects. The lions spread out, their paws stirring little clouds of dust as they searched for water. The youngest cub, barely a year old, dug with his paws at a patch of soft ground. Mud clung to his claws, damp, cool. The lioness joined him, scraping furiously. Within minutes, a thin trickle of brown water appeared, bubbling up from beneath the surface. She drank greedily, then stepped aside to let the cubs have their share. Koro waited. His gaze swept the far side of the riverbed, where thorn bushes clustered in the shade of a small hill. He could feel it again. That scent. Not prey this time, but danger. His muscles tensed. A shape moved between the thorns. Lean, tawny, deliberate. Then another. Two males, younger, stronger, their manes just beginning to darken. They had been watching. The intruders approached with a slow, confident gait. One growled low and deep, sending a tremor through the still air. Koro answered with a roar that echoed down the empty riverbed. It was not the full thunder of his youth, but it carried weight, the voice of a lion who had ruled long enough to know the price of defeat. The younger males hesitated. The lioness gathered the cubs behind her, their small bodies trembling. For a few seconds, the world was silent except for the beating of wings above, vultures circling, waiting to see which king would fall. Then, the younger male stepped forward. Koro lowered his head, his mane bristling. The charge came like lightning. Claws, dust, and a blur of muscle. The sound of impact was thick and wet, the crack of bone beneath the weight of fury. Koro bit deep into the rival's shoulder, tasting blood, but the second male lunged at his flank, driving him down. They rolled together in the dust, snarling, until the younger lions broke away. Koro staggered to his feet, bleeding from his side, his breath ragged but unbroken. The rivals retreated. They were not ready to die for land that held no water. As they disappeared into the thorn bushes, the lioness moved to Koro's side, pressing her head against his shoulder. His blood darkened the pale soil, but his eyes were still bright. That night, they rested beside the shallow pool the cubs had uncovered. The air cooled, and somewhere in the distance, a nightjar began to sing. Koro lay awake, his gaze fixed on the stars, reflected faintly in the muddy water. The fight had taken much of his strength, but it had also given him something, proof that he could still stand. Tomorrow they would move again, following the scent of rain carried faintly from the south. The savannah slept, and for a little while, the old lion dreamed not of hunger or death, but of the sound of water running through the Etsala once more. The next morning began with a dull orange haze spreading over the savannah. The heat of the previous day had not broken. Even before the sun rose fully, the air shimmered and swayed like water. Koro's wounds had crusted dark with blood, his left shoulder stiff with pain. He moved slowly now, each step measured, but his eyes stayed sharp. The lioness and cubs followed close behind, quieter than usual. They had learned that silence kept them safe. They moved south, away from the empty riverbed, guided by instinct and the faint promise of scent on the wind. It was not the smell of prey that drew them. It was something sharper, fouler, the smell of death. To a starving pride, even death could mean survival. By midday, they reached a cluster of low hills, scattered with acacia trees. The wind carried the unmistakable stench of rotting flesh. Koro stopped and crouched low, his golden coat blending with the brittle grass. Across a shallow valley lay the remains of a zebra. The carcass was old, its ribs picked nearly clean, but still surrounded by life of another kind, hyenas. There were 6 of them, mangy, scarred, and fearless. They tore at the last scraps of meat, their laughter echoing through the dry air. Koro watched, tail twitching, while the lioness crouched beside him. The cubs lay flat in the grass, eyes wide. They knew this dance well. Lions and hyenas had shared this uneasy battlefield for thousands of years. Koro could take a kill from hyenas once, maybe twice, but not today. His wounds had stiffened, his pride was outnumbered, and yet hunger pressed at him harder than pain. He waited for the wind to shift, then advanced a few steps, head low. The hyenas froze. One, the leader, a massive female with torn ears, barked out a harsh cackle. Then came another laugh and another, until the whole pack joined in, a chorus of mockery that carried across the plains. The lioness growled softly, her patience fraying. Koro gave a single rumble, low and final, a command to stay. Then he rose to his full height. His mane caught the wind, his eyes fixed on the carcass. For a heartbeat, the hyenas hesitated. They knew the danger of a lion's charge. Even old, even wounded, he was still a force of nature. With a sudden roar, Koro lunged forward. The hyenas scattered, whining and snapping as he crashed into the carcass. Dust and bones flew. He struck at one that lingered too close, his paw slamming into its side with a dull crack. The rest fled into the scrub, their laughter replaced by shrill yelps. The victory was brief. Koro stood over what was left of the zebra, only strips of dry flesh clinging to bone. Still, it was food. The lioness joined him, tearing what she could. The cubs followed eagerly, gnawing at sinew and bone, their muzzles stained dark. It was not enough to fill them, but enough to live one more day. When the feeding ended, they rested in the shade of the acacias. Koro lay apart from the others, his breath steady but shallow. Flies gathered around his wounds, but he did not stir. His eyes followed the horizon, where dark clouds were beginning to gather. Distant thunder, perhaps real this time. The air felt heavier, charged with the scent of change. As the light faded, the hyenas returned, keeping to the edges of the clearing. They didn't dare approach, not yet. The lions slept in turns, ears flicking at every sound. Night on the savannah belonged to no single creature. It was a fragile peace born of exhaustion. Far off, lightning flashed, a single white vein against the purple sky. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of wet soil. Koro raised his head and sniffed. His eyes gleamed faintly in the darkness. The rains were coming. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. And with them, the herds would return. For now, the lions would follow the scavenger's trail, piece by piece, life by life, until the sky opened again and the savannah remembered how to breathe. By the fourth day, the sky had changed. The pale blue of the drought season was gone, replaced by a heavy blanket of gray. The air smelled of iron and dust, the kind of scent that makes every living thing lift its head in anticipation. The savannah was holding its breath again, but this time not from silence, from waiting. Koro felt the change before it arrived. His mane stirred in the rising wind, carrying the taste of distant rain. Every instinct inside him came alive. The lioness and cubs followed close behind as he led them through the open plain. The ground beneath their paws was still hard, cracked into sharp patterns like broken pottery. But it would not stay that way for long. The wind howled now, sweeping across the grasslands with the voice of a long-forgotten ocean. Birds took to the sky in chaotic bursts, hornbills, rollers, and starlings, escaping toward the west. Even the insects had vanished, hiding in the soil before the first drops could drown them. The animals of the plain knew what was coming. They always did. By noon, the pride reached a shallow depression surrounded by low rocks, a natural shelter from the wind. The lioness guided the cubs to the leeward side, while Koro stood watch at the entrance. His wounds had begun to close, though the skin around them itched and pulled. He licked them carefully, his tongue coarse and warm, then raised his head to watch the sky. The clouds had turned black. The first crack of thunder came like a hammer striking the world. It echoed through the air, rolling for miles. Then came another, closer, and a faint hiss. Rain. A few drops at first, large and cold, darkening the dust where they fell. Then the sky split open. The rain poured down in sheets, drumming on the rocks, the soil, the lions' backs. The cubs pressed against their mother, eyes wide at the noise. Koro did not move. He stood in the storm, his mane soaked, his tail thrashing. The water stung his eyes and carried the blood from his old wounds, away in red streaks. For the first time in weeks, the air was cool. The earth seemed to sigh beneath the weight of the storm. By evening, the plain had transformed. What had been dust was now mud, the cracks in the earth filled with rushing water. Streams appeared where none had existed for months, cutting shallow paths that led toward the Etzala riverbed. Frogs began to sing, a sound not heard since the last season of rain. The lioness drank greedily from a puddle, the cubs following, their reflections trembling in the disturbed water. Koro lay nearby, exhausted but alert. The storm had brought relief, but also danger. When the rains came, so did movement. Herds of wildebeest and zebra returning from the south, and with them, other predators. Competition. The savannah would soon be alive again, crowded and loud, a place of opportunity and risk. As the rain eased into a steady drizzle, the lioness joined Koro. She brushed her head against his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. He blinked slowly, accepting the touch. For a brief moment, the pride was at peace, fed by hope rather than flesh. Lightning flashed again, revealing a distant horizon. There, faint but certain, moved the shadowy line of migrating herds. Life returning to the land. Koro rose to his feet, shaking the water from his mane. Tomorrow they would follow the herds north. The season of waiting was over. The time to hunt had come again. The old lion turned toward the wind, listening as it roared through the grass. The savannah was waking, and for the first time in many moons, it called his name not in warning, but in welcome. The morning after the storm broke like a breath of relief. The air was heavy but cool, the light soft and golden through the clouds that still lingered on the horizon. The savannah was unrecognizable. Green shoots already piercing the wet soil. Insects humming again, and far in the distance, the slow, rippling movement of herds returning. Koro stood on a rise, the wet grass brushing against his belly. His mane clung to his neck, darker from the rain. Every sound was sharper now. The grunt of wildebeest, the call of a fish eagle, the whisper of the wind moving across water. He had survived the drought, the battle, and the long march. But survival meant nothing without food. The cubs were weak again, ribs showing beneath their thin coats. The lioness watched him expectantly, her torn ear twitching. She knew the look in his eyes. It was time to hunt. The herd ahead of them stretched for nearly a kilometer. Wildebeest, zebra, and a few stray gazelles. They grazed nervously, heads lifting and lowering in a rhythm as old as the earth. The ground was soft, ideal for stalking. The scent of wet grass masked the lion's smell. Koro motioned with a flick of his tail, a silent command. The lioness melted into the grass, moving low, her body a whisper against the ground. The cubs stayed behind, hidden in the reeds near a shallow pool. Koro circled wide to the left, each step deliberate. His paws sank into the mud without a sound. He kept his head low, his eyes locked on a young wildebeest that had wandered a few meters from the herd. It was limping slightly, perhaps from an old wound. Easy prey, if only the timing was right. The lioness crept closer, positioning herself downwind. Her muscles rippled with restrained energy. For several minutes, the world seemed frozen. Even the wind held still. Then, a sudden call from a nearby bird startled the herd. Heads lifted, legs tensed. Koro exploded from the grass. The wildebeest bolted, hooves tearing the wet soil, but the lioness was already moving, cutting it off from the main group. Mud sprayed as she lunged, missing by inches. The animal veered wildly, straight toward Koro. With a single bound, he was on it. The impact sent both crashing to the ground. The wildebeest kicked, thrashing, but Koro's jaws found its throat. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain pattering softly on their backs and the desperate gasps of prey. Then, silence. The lioness joined him, panting. They worked quickly, tearing into the kill before scavengers could arrive. The cubs approached cautiously, wide-eyed, trembling with hunger. They fed greedily, growling at one another, their small faces red with blood. Koro ate last, as he always had when food was scarce. The meat was fresh, still warm. Each bite gave him strength. Overhead, vultures circled, waiting for permission from death. A few hyenas appeared at the edge of the clearing, pacing, whining, but none dared approach while Koro stood guard. The lioness snarled, her mouth slick with blood, and the scavengers retreated into the mist. By midday, the storm clouds had begun to thin. The sun returned hot and bright, turning the savannah into steam. The smell of wet earth and blood mixed in the air. The lions lay in the shade of a marula tree, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. The cubs slept in a pile, twitching in their dreams, while the lioness cleaned the blood from their fur with slow, steady strokes. Koro sat apart, eyes fixed on the horizon. He could see movement there, more herds, more life. The savannah was healing, but he also knew what the return of life brought: danger, rivals, the endless cycle that ruled his world. His shoulders still ached where the young males had wounded him. They would come again someday, stronger, bolder. For now, though, he had peace. The pride had eaten, the rains had come. The dead tree that had once marked the start of their journey now stood far behind them, forgotten under the new green. As night fell, the first stars appeared, reflected in shallow pools scattered across the plain. The frogs sang louder. The wind was gentle again, as if the land itself had exhaled. And beneath that calm sky, the old lion closed his eyes, not in weariness, but in quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow the hunt would begin anew. But tonight, the savannah belonged to him. The days after the hunt brought calm. The rains had left behind puddles deep enough for drinking, and the herds had thickened across the plains. For the first time in many months, life returned in full color. Grass soft and green, insects thick in the air, and the low hum of abundance that spread across the land like a song. But for Koro, peace was never simple. Where there is life, there are rivals. He sensed them before he saw them, a faint scent on the morning wind. Not the sharp musk of hyenas or the acrid tang of vultures, but something heavier. Lions. Two males again, though this time the smell was stronger, fresher. These were not the reckless youths he had fought at the dry river. These were grown, confident, and close. Koro's mane lifted slightly as he turned his head toward the north. The lioness followed his gaze. She could feel the shift in him, the stillness that came before a decision. Around them, the cubs played near a small pool, chasing dragonflies that skimmed across the surface. The land looked peaceful, but the air had sharpened. They moved at dusk. The pride left the open field and settled among low shrubs near a rocky rise. Koro paced along the edge of the clearing, marking what was his. The scent of his own strength, even fading, was a warning to any intruder. Yet deep down, he knew what every old lion eventually learns. Scent fades, roars, weaken, and the land listens only to the strongest. That night, the intruders arrived. Their roars broke across the plains like thunder, deep, resonant, and full of challenge. The cubs froze. The lioness tensed. Koro answered, his voice carrying far, but lacking the power it once had. The rival males roared again, closer now, circling. They were claiming. In the darkness, Koro's eyes gleamed. He moved forward, every muscle coiled. The lioness crouched beside him, torn between loyalty and fear. She knew what would come. Lions did not share kingdoms. The cubs whimpered softly, pressed together in the grass. The first rival appeared at the edge of the clearing, a massive male with a mane as black as rain clouds. His companion, slightly smaller, waited a few paces behind. They advanced with steady, fearless steps. The black-maned lion growled low, his tail flicking. Koro responded in kind, his teeth bared, saliva mixing with the scent of wet earth. The confrontation was silent for a heartbeat. Then, it broke like lightning. Koro lunged first, the roar tearing from his throat. The impact sent both lions crashing into the mud. The young male was stronger, faster. They rolled, claws tearing flesh, manes matted with blood. The second rival circled, waiting for a moment to strike. Koro fought with everything he had, the strength of his pride, of his years, of his will to stand. But time is a hunter too. The black-maned lion struck hard, biting deep into Koro's shoulder, the same wound from before. Pain shot through him like fire. He lashed out, his claws raking across the rival's muzzle, but his legs trembled. The lioness roared in desperation, darting forward, only to be blocked by the second male. She backed away, snarling, protecting the cubs with her body. Koro stumbled, blood pooling beneath him. His breath came in harsh, broken bursts. The black-maned lion stood over him now, panting but victorious. He roared once, a sound that echoed for miles, then turned his back. The message was clear. The old king's reign had ended. The rivals did not kill him. They didn't need to. They had the land, the pride, and the future. Koro, limping and broken, retreated into the tall grass, his body heavy, but his spirit unyielding. He would not die here, not yet. As dawn broke, the savannah glowed gold once more. The lioness stayed near the cubs, wary but silent. The new males watched from a distance, their forms framed by the rising sun. A new pride had taken shape, and the old one faded like mist. Far away beneath the shadow of a solitary baobab, Koro rested. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his eyes remained open. He had seen many seasons, lost many battles, but he had also lived through what others could not. The wind brushed through his mane, cool and soft, carrying the sounds of his former home, roars, laughter, life. The savannah does not mourn its kings. It remembers them in silence. The night had been long, heavy with the scent of rain and blood. When dawn finally crept over the horizon, it came quietly, pale and silver, like a whisper over the wet grass. The savannah was still. No roars, no laughter, no calls of challenge. Only the soft hum of life returning after the storm. Koro lay beneath the baobab tree, the one whose wide roots curved around him like the ribs of the earth. His body had grown thin, his breath shallow. The wound on his shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, though the bleeding had stopped. The rain had washed the dust from his mane, leaving it streaked with gray. He was tired, but not afraid. Lions do not fear the end. They simply listen for it. In the distance, he could hear the faint murmur of his former pride, the calls of the lioness, the high-pitched mews of the cubs, and the deep, booming roars of the new males marking their domain. The land had moved on, as it always does. Yet, even from far away, Koro could sense that they were alive, safe, fed. It was enough. A flock of guinea fowl passed near him, their wings beating low and fast. They didn't startle him. He watched them with dull, amber eyes, the way he once watched herds of wildebeest crossing the horizon. Everything that moved was familiar now, the rhythm of life he had ruled and served in equal measure. The sun rose higher, warming the damp air. Small flies buzzed around him, but he did not lift his tail to swat them. He had no strength left for defiance. Instead, he closed his eyes and listened. The soft trickle of water from a nearby stream, the rustle of reeds, the sigh of the wind. That wind, the same one that once carried the scent of prey, the same that had forgotten which way to blow when he stood beneath the dead tree, now moved gently across his mane. It cooled his face, brushed against his whiskers, and carried onward toward the plains. It seemed to pause, as if remembering. Koro's breathing slowed. Memories drifted in and out like shadows. The chase through tall grass, the scent of wildebeest, the laughter of hyenas fading behind him, the warmth of cubs pressed to his side. He had lived long enough to see drought turn to rain, to see death give way to life again. The first rays of true sunlight reached the base of the baobab. The golden light slid across his paws, his chest, and finally his face. His eyes opened one last time, reflecting the endless horizon, that vast, untamed world he had ruled not through power alone, but through endurance. When his breath left him, it was quiet. The wind carried it away, across the open land. Somewhere far off, a lion roared, a new voice, young and strong, claiming the dawn. The savannah stirred. Birds rose into the brightening sky. The air was clean again, the earth alive. Beneath the great baobab, the old lion lay still, his mane lifting gently in the breeze. There was no sound of struggle, no sign of pain, only peace. The wind blew west, across the plains, over the rivers, through the tall, wet grass, where cubs played in the morning light. It carried with it the faint echo of a kingdom remembered, and the quiet promise that the land would never forget the lion who once stood beneath the dead tree. And as the savannah awoke fully, the wind, for the first time in many days, knew exactly which way to blow.